Hey everyone, welcome to the Psyched Practice podcast, your one-stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Dr. Ray Christner, and with me,
Paul Wagner.
So, Paul, we kind of did a little extension off of our treatment planning episode with Sandy Pimentel and Brian Chu that kind of gave us an idea to talk a little bit about goals today.
Yeah, something that, as we're talking about treatment plans, goals are such an important part. And, I don't know, I think goals have been something that have come up in a couple different episodes, but to really stop and talk about, why have goals? What does an effective goal look like? What does ineffective goals look like? And, when done well, what's the outcome? And, I think we in a circuitous way covered all of those different ones.
Yeah, I think that it's, the idea that, goals are part of our treatment plan, but goal setting in and of itself is an intervention. It has its own kind of benefits. So yeah, this was, I think, a kind of a good episode to do, and got me thinking a lot about just past patients and feedback. So yeah, it was definitely enjoyable. What was your takeaway today?
It was something you and I talked about, even before we started recording. And I think it just came out time and time again, in a variety of ways when we were talking throughout the episode. And it's this idea of in therapy, the value and importance of having functional treatment goals, but also these meaningful goals for the individuals we're working with. Like if we're not really kind of connecting into like the purpose, the values, the things that get them excited to work towards this goal, then, the follow through is, maybe not as significant, for the treatment one. So if we can align those two, we really can then see a lot of progress in sessions.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that was, probably a message that I think came through a few times, and something I think has such value. And, for me, we were talking about the fact that goals can help us get beyond obstacles. And a phrase that you kind of shared in there, you said, it's resiliency against obstacles. And I just kind of like that phrasing, and that, our having these goals does build a resiliency in us, which I think is really great. And with that, it's not that the obstacles go away. It just gives us a better frame of mind, I think, to push through them. And, I think when we're dealing with difficult things, that's such an important piece. And, it led us to using words like hope and things like that in the episode. And I think that was great. So, I will still the resiliency against obstacles, I think, in future sessions. So,
it's all yours.
And for all of you listening, we'd love to hear from you. If there is information you have or something you want to share about goal setting, please feel free to message us, or as always, join us on social media.
And with that, we hope you enjoy this practice in action episode. Ready, set, goal.
Well, Paul, today we're going to kind of have a discussion that's going to be a little bit of a extension from our episode that we had not too long ago about treatment planning, and focusing today on goal setting.
Yeah. There's one thing that, in that conversation with Brian and Sandy, I think it was Brian who said this, and it's just been on my mind since, and it's come up in sessions. And I think he said, set good goals, but hold them loosely. And that's just been kind of bouncing around in there. Yeah. And, this idea of goal setting and how important it is, as clinicians to do effective treatment planning and bring into the therapy office. But I don't know that we talk about goal setting enough maybe in a broader sense. So because goal setting is all around us, it's right. Most actions that we do serve some form of purpose, which is a goal. And so this idea of, setting good goals, I think is really invaluable. And, I'm hoping that we can expand that out and maybe talk about how do we set some good goals?
Yeah. And I think that the interesting part with it is that you're right. I mean, I think we all go through these things. Like we're all setting goals for ourselves. So there's part of this, it's very personal experience that we all deal with. But then in the therapy room, it holds maybe a little different value. But I'm not sure that they're all that different.
Yeah.
When we were talking to Sandy and Brian about treatment planning, they kept talking about these roadmaps and as far as treatment plans. And it really triggered this thought for me. One of my mentors, Art Freeman, in our therapy classes, he would always refer to a quote from Lewis Carroll that was actually the Cheshire Cat. That's, I may get the actual quote not maybe completely correct from the book, but essentially, if we don't know where we're going, how will we ever know if we get there? And, I think that's really the essence of goal setting. How do we make the invisible visible? How do we say, this is what we're going to accomplish? This is what we're working toward, so that we ensure, whether it's treatment or for our own personal gain, that we're going in the right direction, that we're following the right map.
Maybe just talking a bit in this general sense of goal setting. I'm wondering, Ray, what do you think are the important parts of a goal? What makes a really good goal versus maybe what makes not the greatest goal? And, if we're talking in the therapy setting or just in general life, maybe a smaller goal or a bigger goal, I think there's some overarching themes that are really important and valuable, because if not, I think our goals can become either a bit too broad or unfocused, maybe even inaccurate there. Yeah.
I kind of always, from a general, I guess, guide sense, there's this idea of SMART goals. And, we use that in therapy, but I even think just for our own just general life goals that we have, and for those that aren't familiar, SMART is kind of the acronym for goals have to be really specific. We need to really kind of hone in on what exactly we want. They have to be measurable. We have to basically know when we're getting there. They have to be achievable or realistic. And we'll talk about this in a minute. I don't know if that's always true. I think there's sometimes we can do some unrealistic goals that help. So they have to be in that achievable. They have to be realistic. And then we should also have a time frame to our goals. So I want to achieve this in 3 months or 6 months. So I think that SMART goal framework, I think that holds true for the most part. And I think as we're thinking about how we're writing goals, whether it's, again, therapy or personal situations, keeping those things in mind, I think, help us write something that's pretty clear. How about you? Are you do something different?
So certainly pulling from the SMART goal and the maybe some of the challenging of the attainable. There's a client I work with, and he is a really big Maryland basketball fan, and he'll kind of share some of the quotes of, and I don't know if it's the current Maryland basketball coach or a previous one. I don't follow basketball quite as much, but the idea of pursue perfection, because in the pursuit of perfection, excellence is along the way. Right. And in therapy, it would be hey, don't be a perfectionist. Hey, let's set this attainable goal. But that, I think there's some value there of identifying, what is this unattainable, but really the idea of being perfect, and right. If that can be a motivating factor. So I think the idea of attainable is in some ways saying don't set yourself up for failure, but on the flip side, making sure it's attainable, or even if it's an unattainable goal, making sure it's motivating. And, right. It's kind of giving us, maybe to even pull back on a really early episode with Ro Minuti, giving something some zest, and some of that energy there. And I think that's a really important part, because we can set all the goals we want, but if there's no real motivation behind it, there's no meaning and purpose, value behind it, at best we're going through the motions. At worst, we're not following through.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's kind of the part where I maybe diverge a little bit from that SMART goal pieces. I do think we have to have those nice, tight, neat goals in therapy at times, but we do have to have something that's ambitious. I mean, I think one of the things, and I know we'll kind of get to this throughout this kind of talk today, but I think, we sometimes make goals that are boring. And how do we become zestful about that? How do we have motivation? And sometimes we have to reach for something that's big. And And maybe we never reach it, but we're continually making progress toward reaching it. And so I think research shows that, we tend to actually achieve more when we have ambitious goals than when we have easily achievable goals. So yeah, I think doing that's good. I know I shared this with you. I mean, I remember seeing an interview with Jim Carrey years ago, who said before he became famous, he wrote himself $1 million check, and he kept it in his wallet and looked at it every day until he was able to actually cash the check. Most people would be like, well, that's crazy. You're never going to achieve it. But for him, that was motivating. That was something that kept him pushing and grinding and doing what he needed on a daily basis. I think we need more of that in therapy. I do think the world of motivational speakers and life coaches, they do it better than we do in therapy. Yeah. And I think that doesn't mean we can't have two different kinds of goals. I think we can have people work on these achievable things that are treatment. But at the end, what's that functional piece we want at the end? So, I ask people all the time, we talk about treatment goals, but I always will say, if we can be successful, what is going to be different in your life in 3 months? And what is going to be different in 6 months? And when they give that, then we get a little bit more detailed. And what does that mean? So you want to go out with people, too vague. What's that going to look like? Like, I want to make 10 new friends in 6 months. That's bigger. Or whatever. I mean, it can be anything. So I think there's a balance. I think we need those achievable things. And I think we need those far-reaching things that we're going to push ourselves to get to.
And you said the word, and I'm so happy you did, because I think another part that I feel such an important part of goal setting is being intentional and specific with how we're defining success. So often I'm talking with, teens or children, and, I'm like, hey, so what do you want out of school? Like, what would success in school be? Like, oh, well, I want to get good grades. I was like, okay. Or, I want to learn something and get good grades. Okay. So what happens if we get all A's, but we're really getting lucky at guessing? Maybe we have a bunch of multiple choice quizzes and tests, but we don't actually know the information. We're just getting really lucky. Like, well, that's not okay. That wouldn't be successful for the goal. Yet if we're defining it as good grades, it is success. So, we need to make sure we're being intentional of success with understanding. Sometimes it's like, I just want to learn something. I'm like, okay, what if you fail everything, but because you failed it, you come back and you say, hey, I went back and I looked over and now I have a really deep understanding. Does that achieve your goal? And, they're like, well, no, I want to understand, but get good. So making sure that we're intentional with when we're setting these goals, I want to understand the material and I want it to reflect on my grades. Okay, that's success. And so making sure we're being very intentional with that defining feature. And I also love the idea of we get to be the authors of what success means to us. Success for one individual is not success for the other individual. And we then get to, maybe as therapists or, even if we're setting goals for ourselves or talking with, close friends or relatives about goals, we get to be a part of that process and helping to influence and shape it. So, and this is maybe a bit of a side idea, but there's a video game called Civilization, and there's multiple ways of winning or multiple conditions for success. And I've talked at times with clients of like, what are the success conditions? What are the things that need to happen? We need to see a check mark there for us to feel successful. Right. And what are you defining that as? Because there's multiple ways of going about and reaching this end destination, to go back to the roadmap. So, and a lot of times there's a pause because I don't know that we think about goals in that way of, I actually get to be the author of my goals and I get to be the one who's being very intentional with the language that I bring into it. And I find oftentimes that actually can build into that motivation as well. Right. Well-worded and accurate goal rather than just good grades, lose weight,
feel good. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I agree. I think that, and I think that, in some ways when we have these goals, especially those big goals, it really lets us see, does our behaviors match our goal? That's that roadmap. I've had, I don't know how many people over the years who are like, I want to be a professional basketball player or baseball player. I want to get a scholarship to play basketball in high school or in college. And, I always ask, like, so what are you doing? Like, what are you doing to get there? Like, if you're spending 5 hours on your cell phone every night, that's probably not going to get that goal. Like, if you want that ambitious goal, how do we put the work in to get there? So I think it motivates us, but it also lets us really get real with our behaviors and our actions, and to say, what are you doing every day that's getting you there? And if somebody wants to be a professional athlete, great, keep that in mind. But do you put the work to get there? And what does that take? I say this all the time with teenagers. I say, everybody wants to be successful. Like, I hear that all the time. Like, I want to do this, I want to do that. But do we put the work in to get there? So if we define it, can we work backward and look at what do I have to do that? You were given the example with grades, and I think that learning piece and getting good grades, I'll oftentimes take that further with students and go, okay, those are good goals, but my guess is you don't get super excited about getting good grades and learning something. Maybe some do, but most of them don't. So what's the end game? Like, why are you doing that? What do you want out of it? And, maybe it's, I want to get into an Ivy League college, or maybe it's, I want to, whatever that might be. That's that ambitious part that we tack on the end and say, yeah, you're right. You need to get straight A's, and you need to understand the content so that you can, take entrance exams and all of those things. And that's going to help get there. Might not be achievable, but it's at least an ambition.
I think in the therapy setting, really trying to capture, and this is something that, we've actually, like, it's kind of been phrased a few different times, but you said it, I think, really well, Ray, before we started recording, how the difference between a meaningful goal and a functional goal, especially in therapy, when the over-reliance on the functional, and functional is really important and really valuable, but it doesn't motivate, it doesn't excite, and it alleviates, which is a good thing, but it doesn't add, in a sense.
Yeah, and I think we need both. Yeah, I mean, I talk all the time with people about, yes, we have a goal that you're going to learn coping strategies so that you can manage your anxiety better, and we get it measurable that, your anxiety is going to be a rating of X out of X over a certain amount of time. Like, so we get really behavioral with it, but they don't sit there and have, stars in their eyes with motivation because we're saying that. So that's where we have to then, I think, in therapy, do a better job of saying, okay, like, we're doing these things for your treatment. These are your treatment goals. What's going to be different? What do you want out of it? Like, if we get your anxiety under control, what do you want to be able to do in 6 months? Or if your depression's best, what's that going to be like? And, it's interesting. Even people who I think maybe come in and their mood's really not in a good place when they come in for a first session, it's interesting to watch them light up when you talk about those as a possibility. Maybe it's just hope, right? Maybe we give them something that they're to look forward to. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And I think in therapy, we have to also talk about maybe it's not going to be achieved in 6 months. That's okay. Like, goals are something we're constantly aspiring to. Like, that's what we're doing. And we're going to take steps along the way, but having them does give people something to look forward to. But we need both. I think we need both. And
I think making, like, if we can, having them align and be congruent with one another. And I think, maybe one of our jobs as clinicians is we have to be creative with how we form the connections between the two. I actually just earlier today was talking with a client about exposure, and it's, someone who isn't in the field, it's really hard to, to talk about exposure and for them to be like, yeah, no, I want to do that. It's great for symptom alleviation, but it's not something that they're really interested in. And so we just use the example of that they have an aversion to spiders. And so we were then talking about, hey, are spiders going away anytime soon? And he's like, oh, definitely not. I was like, how nice would it be? You see a spider, you don't have this response. You see a spider and it's like, or even spiders in our way, we're picking it up and moving it out of the way, and we're not going through it. Imagine how awesome your life feels when you don't have to look around every corner of the room to see if there's a spider in there. And he's like, yeah, that would be really nice. And so like that, we're talking about exposure here and then working to align that with, hey, you don't have to walk around in fear anymore. Like, how cool would that be? And I think that's a really easy step to miss, because we as clinicians, we see how that aligns with, if we expose, then we're going to see a reduction here. And then, it's going to abate and we're going to have, more flexibility in these situations. But if we explain it like that, that's not motivating.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we work with children and adolescents, I think that's even maybe more apparent because we do have, I always say we have parental goals and then we have youth goals, and they, so maybe what we have parents aspiring to are those treatment goals. Maybe it's that we're going to cut down oppositional behaviors, or we're going to increase homework compliance, or whatever it might be. But that might not be what the kid wants. And in fact, I actually find very rarely is that what they want. But maybe their goal is, I want my parents to kind of back off a little bit, and maybe I get more time on social media or more time playing video games or able to go out with friends. Those goals aren't completely exclusive of each other, but how do we connect that for kids? And, so, do you do something similar with kids?
There's like this last week on TikTok, and I found a TikTok that I thought it was humorous, but it also had a great message. Up again. We have a goal, right? We're not against TikTok. But it was this little kid, and he was like, it came on. He's like, I'm going to tell you how to get what you want from your parents, and he's probably like 7 or 8. Like, he's pretty young guy. And, it shows him going up and asking his dad, he's like, Dad, can I have ice cream? And, the dad's like, sorry, buddy. Nope. We're going to have dinner soon. You're going to have to wait. And then he's like, and then, he's like, looks at the camera. He's like, let's try that again. And he walks up and he's like, hey, Dad, I missed you today. Can we sit down and talk about our days over a bowl of ice cream? And he's like, yeah, buddy. Yeah, that would sound great. And then he comes back. He's like, you have to know what's important to your parents. For my dad, it's quality time. And so it's funny. It's a humorous one. And there's a couple different examples there. But one of the important pieces, though, the kid just can't eat the ice cream. The kid has to also sit down and talk with his dad about the day, because that's then not going to be a functional. It's not going to continue and maintain. It's, great for ice cream for one time. Right. But how do you get ice cream more than once? And I have to uphold my end as well. And so I think in terms of goals, recognizing it's not just getting what we want, but also taking on challenges, or, maybe it is we're engaging in like the non-preferred, like homework. But if it's ultimately going to then allow us more opportunity and more free time, if we can have those in alignment towards those parental goals, I think it's a really valuable thing.
It is. And I think, again, in therapy, sometimes we get so stuck on what's on the treatment plan. And I'm not minimizing that. I think those are absolutely important. They help direct us in good therapy. But we do have to think that way as well, and think about how to articulate that with kids. I have a young guy I see who, not young, he's actually a college student, young to me, young to me, but he's a freshman in college, and he kind of went in going, when he was going away to college, I said, what's your goals? He's like, well, I want this to be a great social opportunity for me. Like, I want to hang out with friends. I want to do the things that college students do. I want to go to parties. I want to go out in the evening. And he's also an academically, I think, responsible kid. Like, he knows that college also has another purpose. And so, we were talking about that, and I said, so how do we create a goal for yourself that will give you best of both worlds? And so we just were kind of looking, he's like, okay, like, what if I could figure out a plan that my goal was I would get all of my homework done every day before 6 o'clock. And that then 6 o'clock when I can do whatever I want to do. I can go out and, within limits, go out and have fun. And so I just saw him just last week or actually this week. And he said, I was like, yeah, how's that going? He's like, oh my gosh, what a great opportunity for me. That's specific that every day I'm going to have all of my work done before 6 o'clock. He's like, it makes me focused. If I have a 2-hour break, I'm in the library, I'm getting my work done. If my class doesn't start till 10, I still get up at 8 o'clock and I go there. It's almost that the goal created a discipline for him. And this is a guy who has some attention problems and ADHD, and simply having a goal that means something to him. And the goal isn't that, although we defined it as getting his work done before 6 o'clock, the real goal for him is I can be social from 6 o'clock on. That's what I want. I want to be able to go out every night if I would choose to and not have to worry that I'm not going to get my work done. How's that accomplished? I get everything done before 6 o'clock. It sounds simple, but for him, it became such a great motivator. He's doing better in college than he did in high school. It gave him a way to define it differently.
And, all of these different examples. And if we can work in the struggles with the exciting goal, working with couples, one individual has ADHD, the non-ADHD partner wants the individual to be more responsible. The ADHD partner wants, the non-ADHD partner to be more spontaneous and fun.
Right.
Those are both great goals, and there's a lot of overlap there. And so how do we then have both? And so, if the ADHD partner wants to have more sex, hey, okay, what are you doing to provide those opportunities? If your wife is telling you or your husband is telling you that I can't focus and I can't get in the mood with all these house chores done or all of these, these lingering to-dos. Okay, well, hey, there's your objective list. These are done. Improves the opportunity. And it's not a 1-for-1, I did this, and it's not an exchange, but are you going back to those behaviors? Are our behaviors aligning and really giving us the opportunity to experience that desired goal? Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes when I'm working with clients where we're not forming that connection or they're struggling with, their actions really being in line with that, I think there's a disconnect somewhere. And, if we can go back and really try to change and shift our perspective to form an alignment that says, how do I experience both? Typically see better follow through because it's oh, I'm getting in my own way. Me demanding this is actually part of the barrier and problem, or me, wanting more of this and getting stuck on it. And I don't really have anything to do. I'm not activating off of it. So, again, I feel like maybe I'm a bit of a broken record, but just making the goals both functional and exciting and purposeful.
Yeah. And I think that it also, when we do it in that way, it makes us get past the obstacles. I think a lot of research has shown that if we have the right goals that are ambitious goals, we minimize the obstacles more. The example I often use for people is it's like saying, I want to go to the gym every day to get in shape. Too vague, doesn't mean a lot. We've all probably done that. Probably most New Year's resolutions run into that. But then what happens is we run into the barrier where maybe we just don't want to get up in the morning or whatever it might be. And because the goal's so vague, we stop. But if we say, in 3 months, I'm going to run a 5K, or, I think isn't there a plan like 8 weeks to a 5K or something like that? There's a reason for that. We put that time limit, we put that specific, this is what I'm going to accomplish. So in the morning when we don't want to do it, we're more likely to do it. We're more likely to go. And I think with your example with chores, same thing. No one wants to do chores, but hey, if I get this something else later on, maybe the chores are less of an obstacle that we run into. So, I think all of this is just so important to just keep people focused. And again, I think, if we bring this into the kind of the therapy room, how does it look? I think first we have to have good conversations with people about, again, those goals that we need to do for their treatment. And I do think we have to be transparent with those, and I didn't talk those through. I mean, I think that those SMART goals around that are important, but I also think we can have a little fun with it, and we can say, all right, that's the work part. Now, what are we going to get out of this? What is going to make you really push every time between session to do what we need to do to help you out? How are we going to do that exposure? What's going to make you get past that? And if we do that with individuals, I think it's a motivator. And I've been doing that for 20 years. And like I said, I'm just always amazed how it changes people's just whole perception in that first session where, we're talking about serious stuff. And then toward the end of the session, I go, all right, now let's talk about what's really important. What do you really want out of this? Like if life is better, what does it look like? I don't know. I don't think sometimes they've even thought about it. And sometimes I think it stuns people to go like, I don't know. I just want to be less anxious. Why? Like what anxiety is functional for you right now. It's doing something for you. Why do you not, want to? What's the first thing you want to do when your anxiety's down? What's that, And it was interesting. I just did this with somebody the other day and they're like, I want to go to my first concert. Like I've never been to a concert because I don't like crowds. I don't know. Every time we go, hey, are we getting closer to this concert? That's going to be more motivating than going, did you achieve your exposure?
Yeah.
9 out of 10 times. So I think in the therapy room, we do have to talk about both and explain why we have both. And again, make it fun. And
the other piece, and maybe as we're kind of nearing the tail end of the conversation, I think the value of initially framing out how we're going to measure progress along these goals and like that progress monitoring. And so, there are many, many, many screening tools that are phenomenal for just this thing. We're tracking progress and we have, this quantified data. I think that, are we closer to the concert? Hey, how many tours does this band have left in them? How do we make sure we don't run out of time?
If it's the Rolling Stones, 20 more. They'd always retire. So,
and being able to look at like, hey, how are we not? The functional goal is probably easier to measure than these creative and unique goals, but I think that's just as important to talk about. Like, where are we at in this? And does one mean that does progress in one mean that we're making progress in the other? Right. Hopefully so. But if not, that's an important piece to look at. Maybe our goals aren't worded well or aren't congruent. And so, if sometimes our goals are just incongruent, I want this and, vicariously it allows me for this, but it's not a direct correlation. Okay. But again, having that conversation up front, then it feels like, well, I'm no closer to my desired personal goal, even though I'm making a lot of progress. Okay, but remember, we defined that. We worked that out, and we said that these aren't necessarily, one and the same. But what does this then allow you to do, and how? Like, what are the connections there? Even if it's not a one-to-one progress-wise, and I think that framing out those conversations earlier on, and doing the work of progress monitoring is such a valuable part of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess I wasn't thinking about that till you kind of brought that up there. But yeah, I think we need to do both. Like it's, as you were talking, it made me think back to a lady I saw several years ago. And, her goal was to visit her family that lived in Nebraska. But her anxiety was just extremely high and didn't fear flying. That wasn't the issue. It was just generalized anxiety. But when we were doing the treatment goals, we were talking about bringing down anxiety and the typical kind of, addressing negative thoughts and all those goals that we wanted. But when I said, what's going to be different? Like, what's going to be your big thing? And she's like, I'm going to sit in my sister's living room and face to face finally have a conversation in her house. That's my big goal. And so, when we were going through therapy, we're doing the GAD-7s and all those things to look at anxiety. But along the way, we would throw in these things and say, our first progress monitoring to you sitting in your sister's living room is you looking up an airline ticket. Don't buy it. I just want you to look it up. I just want you to see what the schedule looks like. I want you to just start there. And when you get that, I want you to come in and you need to tell me, like, that's going to be our first marker that you're a step closer. And I don't remember how long it was. I mean, it's been some time since I've seen her, but I remember her just coming in going, I did it. Like, I looked up 3 different airlines and I know the flights, and I only want to do a direct flight. I don't want to, stop multiple places, and here's my options, and just the excitement from the fact that she did it. That's a good progress monitoring tool. We got somewhere, and then it was next having the conversation with her sister to pick a date. And then it was booking the airline ticket. And, we booked it, I think, 6 months in advance. Like, it was like some time away. But again, then she made a purchase. Now we have something that, they're sitting there ready. You've already paid for them. It's a non-refundable ticket. We got to, how are we going to make this happen? It was such a great progress to watch for her. And it was something she achieved. She was able to do it. I think if we just focused on those other things and didn't have those steps in progress monitoring for the bigger goal, we would have missed it. And that doesn't take the value away from, she loved seeing her anxiety go down on the GAD-7. She I mean, that was rewarding to her to see, like, wow, okay, like I'm doing better the last few weeks than I did when I first came in. And that was still a great part of progress monitoring, but not nearly as exciting as her being able to say, I had a conversation and I committed to my sister and I'm going to see her on this date. So, I think we do have to do progress monitoring on both. So,
to talk about, you mentioned it earlier, but just to bring it back around, because this is it in kind of action, how it builds resiliency against obstacles. And so if I have those tickets, whether they're sitting in my email or they're physical tickets that I have sitting on the counter, and I'm starting to experience, that distress, starting to experience some of the negative cognitions or automatic negative thoughts, like, oh yeah, no, but this is why. And GAD-7 is a great tool.
Yeah.
I don't know that most get excited taking the GAD-7, but getting excited to say, hey, no, I'm not getting this taken away from me.
Right.
It's a wonderful tool. And, absolutely. And just kind of maybe that putting it into action, so to speak. So not only, the goals, but being able to then talk about when you're looking at that ticket, that's going to help you be resilient against these stressors that are, challenging you. Yeah,
I love that. And, it's interesting. And these big goals, I don't put them in my treatment plans. They're not, but I do mention them when I write my notes and just kind of put, because again, I think it's part of the person's life. It's important to them. But our treatment goals and our kind of overall meaningful goal, they work together. But we may document them a little differently.
Yes.
I'm not sure how much insurance companies want to know about trips, but it is something, again, I think keeping people on track for those things are important, and making sure it's something that truly does motivate them. And maybe that doesn't come out the first session. I think, I kind of alluded to, the first session we get there. We do for a lot of people, but there's times that, maybe people's distress is too high that first session. But we still get there. I would say, I'm going to venture to say the majority of people I see within 3 sessions, we've had a conversation about setting a more ambitious goal for themselves.
And especially for those individuals, when asking that, that personalized one, like, what does this look like? And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I love the idea of like, hey, it is fine not to know, but now that we're aware of it, it's not fine to continue to not know.
Right.
And so, we now have a goal of figuring out what is meaningful, and, how do we measure that? Like, when are we going to explore it? So even I love, when I have a whole spiel when people say, I don't know in my room too often, and then like that they get caught in it. But that's one of them of like, hey, if you truly do not know the answer to this question, that's absolutely fine. But now that we're talking, it's not going to be fine, that it continues to be an unknown. So let's do some exploration. Let's try to figure it out. And I think that in itself can be motivating
Yeah, I agree. I think not only is it motivating, I think for those people who have struggled in treatment before, it gives them a different viewpoint. And I've had people who have seen other therapists before. And, as we're wrapping up therapy, I'll always kind of, just kind of go back and just say, kind of our exit interview of, what do you think helped you the most in this process? And I can't tell you how many times people have said, you were the first person that made me look at what I was going to get differently. Like everybody talked about my depression being, less severe or my anxiety being less severe. But no one put that into what I wanted. Like what I do it, like what's the whole benefit? So I think that doing that might change their mindset sometimes. Again, maybe it's just, it goes back to that, gives them some hope to do something different.
And, at the end of the day, I think if we can inspire hope, that's a large part of our job. So, we're doing something well.
I would agree.
Well, and with that, Ray, I think that we hit all of our goals. So, time to pull back here a little bit. Certainly hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back next week. But until then, be well, stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional-patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.